Hello and welcome back to another Design Clips here at W+9. This is Dawn Woolslegel, and today's cards are very simple yet striking Christmas cards with a non-traditional color palette. We're going to be using lots of embossing, and we're going to be using our Be Merry and Be Merry Floral stamp sets. Now, the Be Merry Florals is one of those very simple layering stamp sets, so it's not intimidating. It's very much like our fresh cut florals, so if you liked those, you'll love these. Also included in the set is a one silhouette stamp that mimics what the stamp set looks like when you stamp the different layers together. So you can either stamp the base layers and then add different colors on top using the two separate images, or just the silhouette image by itself in one color. So you could use those silhouette images as a guide on how the multi-step stamps fit together. So again, this one is very unintimidating. Is that a word? Non-intimidating? But it allows you to create some very interesting stamped flowers. And down here you can see what most of them look like when they're assembled and put together with their different layers. Okay, so for today's card, we're just going to be using those standalone silhouette images, and we're going to be doing some heat embossing like I mentioned earlier. I'm working on our coal mine cardstock here, and it's a very dark gray. It's not quite black. So when we stamp black onto this cardstock, it's going to stand out. And that's what we're going to use for our first set of leaves. And I'm going to stamp these in a halo all the way around the outer edges of my panel here. And I'm starting out with regular dye ink for this base layer so that I can come in and do all of my heat embossing on top of it later. This will push those leaves to the background, and anything that I heat emboss on top of it will immediately come to the foreground. For these designs, I'm leaving the center area open for my sentiment. You could definitely take this layer all over the background if you wanted, but I wanted it to look like all of the flowers were coming in from the outer edges of the paper. So I'm stamping them off the paper and rotating their orientation as I stamp. And once that's all done, I can come in and heat emboss my sentiment. I'm going to be using the Be Merry stamp set. This has some beautiful large-scale sentiments, and I'm going to be using the Christmas Wishes one here. I'm going to be stamping my sentiment using the Mini Misty, so I've already got the stamp adhered to the door, and I'm just going to adjust the positioning of my cardstock here. I already know it's in the center from left to right, so I can just move my paper up just a tad and get it exactly where I want it vertically on the card. So you will want to make sure that your ink is completely dry from our leaf stamping. If there's any moisture in the paper whatsoever, your embossing powder will stick to those areas. So if it's not completely dry, you can hit it with your heat tool. Again, it's dry to the touch, but if that paper is still moist, it will hold the powder. I'm treating it with a anti-static buddy bag here, and then I will use some Versamark ink to just stamp down this sentiment. This is a clear sticky ink, and it will give something for the embossing powder to adhere to. And I'm using Wow's super fine bright white opaque embossing powder. Now we are embossing on this dark gray, almost black cardstock, so it's important that we brush away any stray embossing powder because it will show up as little white specks on this dark cardstock. It will be very obvious. So I'm just using a dry paintbrush to knock any excess away, and then I will use my heat tool here to melt the embossing powder, and then we have our sentiment. So now we can move on to our floral embossing, and that is going to just be a repetition of the same steps that we used for our sentiment. I'm going to treat it with the embossing buddy bag, stamp it in Versamark, and then cover it with embossing powder and heat set it. Now, it's important that you use your embossing buddy on this particular card, especially because we're working on that dark cardstock. You'll want to use that bag in between your heat setting because your fingers will leave oil fingerprints on the cardstock that you won't be able to see, but the powder will stick to it if you don't treat it with the anti-static tool. So it's just something to keep in mind if you want to keep those little white specks at bay, and you can always knock off any excess with a dry paintbrush, don't forget. So once all the white flowers are done, we can come in and do the exact same thing, but this time we're going to be using these little berry images, and we're going to be using gold embossing powder. Another tip is, since this is so heavy on heat embossing, if you let your heat tool heat up for about 15-20 seconds before you bring it to the paper. It means you have to hold that heat on the paper for a shorter amount of time, and you'll get less warping. I've also noticed that the more times that you apply the heat to the embossing powder, it continues to break it down. So this will also help you avoid overheating your embossing powder too. I finished adding my gold berries and I went ahead and made a second one, and now it's just time to mount these focal panels. I'm going to do one on white cardstock and then I'm going to do the other one on black cardstock. I couldn't decide which I liked better, so I went ahead and did both. And you could adhere it just like this and it would look great, but I wanted to add just a little bit of sparkle. So starting with the black one, I'm going to matte this one with some silver glitter paper. Now this is from Ranger, it's by Tim Holtz, and it's gorgeous. So I'm just gonna matte this with just a little, it's probably about 1/8 of an inch peeking out from behind it, and I think this is just gonna add that extra little bit of oomph. And because we're adhering this to glitter paper, I need to use a really strong adhesive that I know will grip onto that glitter paper. So I'm using some double-sided Terrific tape. You could use the Be Creative tape as well. It's just a very thin double-sided adhesive that you can tear with your fingers. I'll remove the backer tape and then just adhere this to the glitter paper. Then I'll just take it over to my trimmer and trim off the excess. And I'm left with a perfect mat with about 1/8 of an inch all the way around. And again, if you want to keep this perfectly flat for postal reasons, then you could adhere this directly to your card base, but I want to add just a little bit of dimension. So I'm going to be putting some fun foam behind this. And because the back of that glitter paper is very slick, it's a slick surface, I wasn't sure if anything other than this double-sided adhesive would work. So I've just added some of that to the back. I'm adhering my fun foam and then I'll adhere that to my card base. Now for the white version, I didn't have any gold glitter paper, so I just decided to make my own little gold embossed edge, and I'll show you how it's really easy and quick. I've just taken a white piece of paper here and I've trimmed it down to about 1/4 of an inch bigger than my focal panel, and I'm just going to cover the edges with Versamark ink, completely cover it. Then I'm just going to sprinkle on my gold embossing powder, and then I'm just going to melt it. So now I've got this beautiful gilded gold edge that exactly matches the gold in my project. Now this would look beautiful if you had some glitter gold embossing powder as well. I just didn't have any on hand at the time, but don't worry, I fixed that. Now I've got plenty of it. All right, so I've just mounted this the exact same way that I mounted the black card, and that will complete today's cards. I am a huge fan of unconventional Christmas color combinations. I think you guys already know this. I especially like how striking these are and how elegant they are. I really hope that you enjoyed today's projects, and don't forget that you'll be able to find all of the supplies listed in the description box below, as well as on our blog at stampawaywithme.blogspot.com. You can find all of the featured W+9 supplies at w+9.com, as well as at many of your favorite retailers. Again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I will see you next time. Bye!